right, with us is the Framework 16, Framework's fully upgradable 16-inch laptop. This new iteration has AMD's Zen 5 chips with an optional NVIDIA RTX 5070. We have spent a ton of time testing the crap out of this laptop, and we think there are two camps of buyers. If you are looking for a solid 16-inch performance laptop, you're going to be very disappointed with the Framework 16. It costs more than laptops that are substantially more powerful and feel more premium. It's also very large and heavy for the performance it gives you. On the flip side, if you are a techie and want to buy a very unique device with a ton of potential, then there is nothing quite like a Framework. In fact, one of our own staff bought the original Framework 16. But we feel if you want a Framework, the Framework 13 stands out more, as it's competing with laptops that are usually not upgradable, whereas the 16 is up against laptops that already have replaceable memory, storage, Wi-Fi, and battery, which is good enough for most people. All right, with that said, here's the pros of the Framework and then its cons. First, the laptop is fully upgradable, as I said. Easy to understand manuals, great community support. There is really nothing else in the industry quite like it. Next, the Framework does not utilize liquid metal for cooling the CPU. They have switched over to a phase change thermal compound. You may not have heard about this, but even Linus at LTT mentioned that his laptop broke because the liquid metal leaked and ruined some of the contacts on the motherboard. We haven't had any viewers report this, but it's great that Framework are avoiding the issue altogether. The next pro is this laptop's ports. Their hot swappable ports are simply amazing. UHS 2 SD card reader, 3rd gen HDMI port, 2nd gen DisplayPort, 2.5 gig Ethernet port, USB-A port, headphone mic combo jack, and so on. You can get any port you might want with this thing, and 4 of the hot swappable ports are capable of charging the laptop up to 240 watts using USB-C charging. The back of the 5070 module is also compatible with Power Delivery 3.1, which is the same USB-C standard. We haven't seen 240 watt USB-C charging on any other laptop so far, so props to Framework for pushing the envelope here. Another pro is how it feels to use the laptop during high-intensity tasks like gaming. Unlike many competitors, it stays pretty quiet in terms of fan noise. Most gaming laptops start to hit 56 or even up to 60 decibels pretty quick, but the Framework stays well under that. In terms of heat, though, it does get a bit warm on the keyboard deck, which aligns more with its competition. Both these things continue to be true in the different Windows performance modes, where we don't see huge differences in comfort or performance. This is a bit disappointing, as it's nice to be able to ramp up the fans more to increase possible FPS and lower them down for a quieter experience. The Framework doesn't provide a lot of built-in functionality for tuning, but unsurprisingly, there are some open source projects online for this. This is, of course, for gaming. If you are only doing CPU tasks like programming, the wattage fed to the CPU changes. The lowest mode does offer decent heat and fan noise improvements for a somewhat minimal drop in performance. In terms of light use, the only time I ever felt it get too warm for comfort was when I was driving an external display directly from the dedicated GPU. So unless you're doing that, it stays pretty comfortable. This means that most of the time, the Framework is pretty comfortable to use, and it doesn't get uncomfortably warm during gaming or video editing. The next pro is how sturdy the laptop feels. Despite its modularity, this laptop has minimal keyboard deck flex and feels well built. Rounding out the pros, the keyboard is comfortable with customizable RGB. The trackpad had a soft click to it and felt good, and the screen is a bright, color-accurate one. So that's the pros. Here's the cons. For a big, heavy, and expensive laptop, its performance is extremely far behind competitors. We have the version with a Ryzen 7 350 CPU and RTX 5070 GPU. It comes in at about $2,450. That is way too much for these components, and it's outclassed by similar-priced laptops. This is because its CPU and GPU aren't fed as much power as we've seen in other laptops. Its CPU taps out at about 45 watts, which is pretty low for a laptop this large. Its GPU also isn't fed max power at 100 watts. These RTX 5070s can go up to 125, including boost. By the way, if you think that upgrading to a Ryzen 9 CPU will help, it might not. Framework claims it isn't fed any more power. In gaming, though, the Framework did actually do a little bit better than our synthetic benchmark showed, likely because it's able to sustain a high power draw. Heck, it even competes with the Zephyrus G14 with the 5070 Ti. Sometimes manufacturers say they can feed a GPU a certain amount of power, but in real-world use, the GPU has to be throttled down so that it doesn't melt the laptop, like in the small G14. But this still doesn't save the Framework from being way behind the performance of other thick, heavy 16-inch laptops at this price point. Making this even worse is the GPU maxing out at an RTX 5070 that only has 8 gigs of VRAM. Many modern titles are starting to need more. For example, Monster Hunter Wilds sees a big drop in 1% lows during graphically challenging parts of the game if you run it at Ultra. You have to bring it down to high to avoid this. Realistically, most people aren't going to be able to tell the difference, but games are becoming more graphically intensive, and it's disappointing to have this limitation. Other laptops at this price and this size have 5070 Ti and 5080 GPUs that have more VRAM. Nirav, the founder, did say they considered putting in a 5070 Ti, but couldn't fit it into the modular component. This is one of the distinct trade-offs of a framework. Next is the display. While it does have many positives, like we said, if you are purely buying one of these for coding, which a lot of framework buyers are, there are better displays out there for you. 2560 by 1600 is not the sharpest resolution. Small code is going to look crisper on a higher resolution display like the one in the Yoga Pro 9i or the MacBook Pro 16. On the flip side, a QHD panel like the one in the Framework is better for gaming, as it's easier for the GPU to drive less pixels. Hopefully Framework comes out with a higher resolution panel option so that you can get the choice. Also, one nit we have is that our screen required calibration out of the box, which is common with DIY solutions like this. It had a very green tint and looked really crappy. After calibration, it looked great. This is just a step some folks may not want to take or know how to. The next con is the price, as I've already mentioned. It's very expensive considering the parts you are getting, and the GPU module being $700 is very pricey for what it offers. It does improve graphics performance from the prior generation, it's just an expensive upgrade. As the Framework 16 becomes more mature, upgrading the GPU may make more sense, but being realistic, at the prices of these components, most people will be better off selling their old framework and buying a new laptop. This really defeats the purpose of an upgradable laptop. Next con is battery life. When unplugged, the framework doesn't throttle its CPU performance by all that much, which is good, but then again, it doesn't perform that well to begin with. In fact, given how poorly it performs, it's disappointing its battery life isn't better. We measured around 8 hours for basic office tasks. The next con is how the laptop looks. Some people may like it, but to us, it looks a bit like Frankenstein's monster. It lacks cohesion. You could probably make this thing look better than how we have it configured, but it's not going to look better than a Zephyrus G16. Also, when the metal pieces come together next to the trackpad, it just seems janky. Some of the pieces wiggle a little bit or have more flex than the keyboard deck itself, which feels cheap. It's not what I want to experience on a $1,600 laptop, let alone the almost $3,000 this laptop can cost. It is also really big and heavy. It lands among the larger, thicker class of 16-inch laptops, but its components are what you'd expect in a thinner, more portable one. With its GPU module installed, it is one of the deepest 16-inch laptops out there. And then, due to its thickness, it felt uncomfortable typing the script on it, even though, as I said, I like the keyboard. The angle I had to rest my wrists at was awkward. The edge is rounded, so it doesn't cut into your wrist, but that doesn't fix the angle. The last con I want to mention is that this laptop's upgradability, while simple for a laptop, is not simple for the average buyer. We had to reseat the GPU. Ours took a while to get seated correctly, and our initial results were much worse before we realized what was wrong. We aren't super worried about the average framework buyer knowing how to do this, but it gives us pause on recommending it to newcomers. Look, even Seth, who is a techie on our team, wasn't into the Framework 16, so he's going to close us out with his thoughts.
Hey everyone, look. I love that this laptop exists. Framework's mission to push the industry in a more repairable direction is something that I support strongly as someone who repairs things myself. So you'd think that I fall into the target market for this laptop, but surprisingly, I don't. Now, before I get too many tomatoes thrown at me, just hear me out. I want a repairable laptop. I just don't care as much about having a modular laptop. I mean, do I really need a keyboard deck that looks like this? Or sounds like this? I want a laptop that feels like a finished, complete device. Most gaming laptops already let me swap out the usual suspects like the RAM and SSD, and the only real consumable part is the battery. The real problem is just being able to purchase the parts themselves, and that is something Framework is doing well. A personal example is my recent search for a replacement battery for my 2023 G14. Asus doesn't sell the parts directly, so I have to rely on either eBay or third-party sites to find one. And let me tell you from experience, it's a gamble whether or not you get a lemon part from one of those sites. If I had a Framework, I could place an order right now and get an OEM battery on my doorstep within a few days. Now, if I wanted repairability, great Linux support, and official part support, while still feeling like a more complete package, something I'd personally consider would be a ThinkPad. ThinkPads are very repairable and have multiple pages of parts per model on Lenovo's site. And if you look at used ThinkPads on eBay, which I know are pretty popular in the Linux community, you can find them pretty cheaply too. Framework built exactly what they set out to build, and kudos to them for that. It's awesome. It's just not for me. I feel I could get a more complete device if I got a gaming laptop or a ThinkPad. For my personal use case, either of those would be repairable enough for me.
All right, I know Seth was meant to close us out, but after he finished, we spent another week on this laptop. You see, in our original video, Sierra was going to mention that Linux support is fantastic on the framework. Super easy, but we hadn't tested it with the NVIDIA GPU. And that's when all hell broke loose. NVIDIA is very difficult to get going on Linux. This is no fault of frameworks, they did an admirable job to provide excellent guides. But do not expect that because this is a framework, Linux will just work. It took us a couple of days to get it going. Even then, you boot up Forza, the screen goes black, you can hear the game running, that's in the background, but you can't actually play it. Now, some apps we were able to get going, like Furmark and LM Studio, and for those we did get similar test results between Windows and Linux. It's just not easy. Funnily enough, AMD GPUs are actually better supported on Linux, but unfortunately, there really aren't any competitive ones for laptops right now. And this really brings us to our conclusion. Framework's core value prop, at least as we see it, is that their laptops are fully upgradable with excellent Linux support. Unfortunately, for the Framework 16 with the RTX 5070, this just doesn't really pan out. It's much more expensive than comparable performing laptops. Those laptops are already upgradable enough for most. And even if you do want to upgrade the motherboard or the GPU of the framework, those components are so expensive it doesn't really make sense. As Sierra said, you could buy another laptop and that will give you more improvements than just a new CPU and GPU. That's for the same money. And by the way, I'm not even factoring in the amount of money you'd get back for selling your old framework. And when it comes to Linux, because of NVIDIA, it's rough. Look, if you have your heart set on the Framework 16 and you know what you're getting into, absolutely go buy one, you'll enjoy it. But if you are looking for a high-powered 16-inch laptop, there are just better ones out there. And if you're just interested in the Framework experience, we feel the Framework 13 makes the most sense of their lineup. All right, we're done here. This has honestly been the most difficult laptop review we've ever done, but we really wanted to be thorough. Guys, we respect the Framework community, we really do respect what Nirav and his team are doing, and of course we wanted to provide the best content for you. Anyway, if you are in the market to buy a laptop, absolutely check out our website bestlaptop.deals. It shows all the laptops that we recommend for different types of buyers. You can even combine use cases together. We also track prices right across retailers so you know where to buy from to get the best price and when it's the best time to buy. Click that like button, get subscribed, and of course, we will catch you later.